What is good, NBA fans? I'm your host, Matt Knost. Welcome into another week of Dropping Dimes. I apologize. I'm 5 minutes late to start today. Almost forgot about street sweeping, which is a beautiful thing they do here in Southern California. And if you don't move your car, it's an obscenely high ticket. And I had to move my car real quick. But I'm here, and we are on the precipice of the playoffs. It starts in about 11 days, something along those lines. And the picture keeps changing. Things keep moving. Teams keep jostling for position up and down, up and down. Certain teams are getting hot. Certain teams are getting cold. And what I wanted to talk about today are these late season injuries that we've had a few of and how it affects certain teams. And then also the inverse of guys that have been injured for a while now coming back, and whether that's going to change the playoff fortunes of anyone in particular. But it all sparked from Robert Williams, aka Time Lord, on the Celtics going down and tearing his meniscus. And that's a huge blow. Nobody's been playing better over the past, at this point, like 30 to maybe 40 games than the Boston Celtics. They're just crushing teams over and over again. Like, there was a quote attributed to Donovan Mitchell after last week's shellacking by the Celtics, and he went over D Wade, who's a part owner of the Jazz, and just like, I don't even know what defenses they're running. Like, basically, this is just, the whole team is so flummoxed that we don't know what to do right now. And Time Lord is a huge part of that. I mean, he's an interior defender who can help protect the rim, but also he is a help side defender where there are numerous times a play looks like it's going to go against the Celtics, and then out of nowhere, here comes Time Lord to volleyball spike a ball into the 10th row. Several of them he could just grab in the air and bring down with him, and yet maybe his natural reaction is to emphatically send that thing into the rafters. And you couple that with he runs to the rim better than anybody else that they've got. And he's just grown in confidence over the course of this year to the degree that losing him for any amount of time is a massive loss for the team, in and of itself. Because they've got Daniel Tice as a backup, and Tice is a good player, but he's nowhere near the caliber athlete that Robert Williams is. So he's serviceable in the role, but he is much better at this point in his career to just come in and play 10, 15 minutes so Time Lord can get a little bit of rest. So they lost him to a meniscus tear, and I'm just, I saw it on Twitter and then instantly began to think of all the ramifications that has for the Celtics and for the East in general. Because I was having a discussion over the weekend with a couple buddies discussing the lay of the land and whatnot, and we all almost simultaneously, when we got to the East, you talk about the Heat, they've been number one for the whole season, but I'm not exactly buying it as of right now. In Philly, I'm not a believer in, because the whistles are going to dry up, and both their two primary stars, a lot of their offensive output is predicated upon getting to the line. So I'm just not buying into that right now. Prove me wrong. I could be 100% wrong, but you couple that with, Harden has a tendency to no-show in the playoffs, especially if they get down by any kind of amount of points, and he almost loses the will to play. He's just kind of out there in a perfunctory role of I'm contractually obligated to be here type of situation. So you take those two chess pieces off the board. Other teams have flaws, and you're looking at the Celtics and the Bucks and be like, that's your more than likely your Eastern Conference Finals right here, which means the Celtics have a chance of making the finals. And then to lose Time Lord is like, oh man, that kills him. So he had surgery on his meniscus, and his projected timeline to come back is 4 to 6 weeks, which best case scenario brings him back at some point in the second round. But that's best case scenario. That's assuming that his rehabilitation goes all according to plan. His body responds to the surgery and everything that they're doing to set the stage for him to come back, because it could be longer. He could be out for 6 to 8, and then at that point, if it's 8 weeks, they're really going to have to push fairly deep into the playoffs in order to ensure that he comes back. Now, in the opening round, as of right now, they'd have the Raptors, who are going to be a tough out no matter who the Raptors play. They're going to be a tough out. And if they drop down to the 4 spot, because the Celtics are in the 3 right now, they would go against the Bulls, and that's a slightly better matchup, I think, for them, especially in the absence of Time Lord, because it's not like we have any super athletic 5 that's going to give them a tremendous amount of difficulties. But Time Lord also gives them flexibility on defense too, and their defense has been ridiculously on point. So there's his injury, and then you get the news that the Cavs, who have been reeling all season from injury, as much as I feel like my Bulls are snake bitten, the Cavs have gotten the even shorter end of the stick on this, because Evan Mobley goes down with an ankle sprain in the game against the Magic, and last I saw he's set to get an MRI. In the same game, Lauri Markkanen banged his knee into another player, and he had to be helped off the court. Now he came back, but still, Markkanen's not going to be at 100%. Jared Allen still has the fractured finger, and optimistically is he comes back for the playoffs, but I haven't seen anything other than we're hopeful. This could happen. They just lost Dean Wade, who was playing solid frontline minutes for him in the absence of these guys going down with injuries. He's done for the season with a meniscus tear. And then they just have the cornucopia of they lost Rubio and then shipped him out. Then Colin Sexton is done for the season. Rondo's banged up right now. Karis LeVert is kind of always a little bit banged up. So it's through their entire roster, the Cavs, who have been one of the best stories in the NBA this year, are suddenly looking like a pretty easy first round exit if everything stays as is. And that just sucks. I mean, this is their first winning season without LeBron since I think it's like the mid 90s, 95, 96 season, something like that. It's a great story. They've built it through the draft and through key acquisitions in trades, a la Jared, Allen, and free agency with Lauri Markkanen. And they've built an interesting, dynamic team that is going to be derailed by injuries. And you're like, oh man, here's another one. Like you think you have a clear picture, although the Cavs have been on this trajectory, unfortunately, for the bulk of the season, where it just doesn't look like it's their year. And thankfully, they've got the youth to where perhaps the best thing they can take out of this is what the instructive nature of being a winning team and getting out there and competing night in, night out, being in a playoff hunt, having a target on your back because you're a better team than most and they want your position. It's different to be in the top half as opposed to the bottom half when you're always struggling for relevancy. And now you're one of the kings of the hill. You guys were a hell of a story all season. And it's like the Matrix, the first one. It's not like this. Not like this. You worked so hard, but the not like this started for the Cavs, unfortunately. a little while back. But it'll have playoff implications as to who wants to take them on and who doesn't, and various, seedings. Right now, they're in the play-in game at the 7th spot, so they're going to have to either beat Brooklyn, who's in the 8th spot, and they automatically bump up, and they take on Milwaukee in the first round, or if they lose that and then win the game against the winner of the Hornets and Hawks, then they're taking on what would be Miami right now, and it just how decimated they've been by injury, neither is an ideal matchup. And you just kind of feel for, the players and the fan base. They've struggled for this long to create a sense of identity outside of either having LeBron on the team or not having LeBron on the team. And that has been the bulk of who they are for almost 2 decades, which is crazy to say. But they're not the only ones, dealing with tons of injury. Like the other big story from last night is Paul George is back. That's on the flip side of they didn't just lose somebody. Now we're adding somebody. Does that change the nature of your expectation level of what they could do? And then the rumors are that Kawhi has not been elevated to full contact yet, but he is with the team at practice. He's getting shots up. He's traveling with the team. And, the burblings over the past couple months are he is pushing himself to make a return this year. Now, PG looked dynamite last night. Just incredible. Started a little bit slow from 2. I was following along on my phone last night. I couldn't watch the game just to see, how's he doing, his shot profile, where he's effective so far on the floor. And early on in the game, it was from 3 pretty much predominantly. When last I checked in before, then I had to jump in my car and drive for a distance. Then I get out and game is finished. And he went from shooting like 41% from the field overall to 50. And previously he'd been shooting well from 3 and just overall ended up having a monster game for a guy that's been out for a while. And you're looking at the Clippers going, they were in the midst of a losing streak. I think it was 5 straight before last night. But they've stayed fairly relevant, all things considered, in the absence of their 2 biggest players, but primarily in the absence of PG because Kawhi hasn't been there. And if you're adding PG back in and he looks anything like he did last night, well, before he played last night's game, I was like, okay, if they were to get both of them back, PG has a better chance of getting back to 100%. So let's say PG is like 95-ish%. And if you can get Kawhi at 85 to 90% of what he's, historically been, well, that team is going to be dangerous. Do I think that they're finals dangerous? No, because Phoenix just looks like the juggernaut of the lead. They have, I believe, it's an 8.5 game lead over second place in the West. And that's not even to mention how much of a lead they would have if they were in the East. Because I think number 1 in the East would be number 4 in the West. I can look that up real quick. 632. They'd be tied for 3rd in the West. So they'd be 13.5 games up on Miami right now, just like they are the Warriors. It's just how far. But, suddenly that Clippers team, man, they're in the 8th. If I'm Minnesota, I'm kicking myself having to play them just to ensure that I make it out of this first play-in game. Otherwise, you're going to have to win the next game, which you should feel good about if you're Minnesota or the Clippers. You're better than both the teams below you. But, there's a lot of ifs in that statement about the Clippers. If PG can maintain this and get back to what is 100% of him, which Last night looked like it. And then if they can get Kawhi back, because by adding PG, they're a tough out by themselves. And I think someone could still take them in a best of 7 in that they could easily lose because right now they'd come in and have to play Memphis, and Memphis is just doesn't matter who's out there. We're going to crush you. Ja and Triple J are out right now, and Desmond Bain was like, I can lead this team. And it goes on to do it. And unfortunately for Ja, I think it's going to hurt his All-NBA case, at least in my next week I'm going to do MVP, All-NBA, Rookie of the Year, probably Coach of the Year, and I think I'll end it there because that's enough for one show. But I think it hurts his All-NBA case, especially for first team, because they've played so well without him. So for the Clippers, I mean, at least it makes them interesting and it opens up a discussion that didn't exist in the not too distant past. And there are other so the Lakers have now fallen out of the play-in game, something that's been in the cards for a while, and their road gets no easier for the time being. They have coming up, they've got the Jazz on, I want to say, Thursday night. Yeah, they've got the Jazz tomorrow night. They got a back-to-back. Then Friday, they're on the road for the Jazz. Friday, they've got the Pelicans at home, but the Pelicans are playing to maintain that seed. So the Pelicans are going to bring everything that they've got. Then they've got Denver on Sunday, Phoenix on Tuesday, Golden State on Wednesday. They get an OKC team that's pretty much shut everybody down, a la the Portland Trailblazers. It's amazing how bad the Trailblazers team has been just beset by injuries, those poor bastards. And then they close out the year with Denver. And at that point, who knows where Denver's at? Perhaps if taking a loss isn't going to affect their seed. Now, it's in Denver, so maybe Denver rests their guys. I don't know when we come to that. But I would assume everything leading up to that OKC game, every one of those teams are going to be bringing as much as they possibly can. And the Lakers, if they want to climb back into this, are going to have to beat a huge swath of excellent teams. And I say all that with the injuries because LeBron rolled his ankle pretty badly. If you've watched the clip, that it did not look fun. He closed out the rest of the game, but then he missed last night's game against Dallas. And you're like, oh, okay, maybe he's out of game. Be back for the next one. But the quote from Vogel makes it sound like it is indeterminate as to when he's coming back. I mean, he's not done for the season, but there's no firm timetable. And the projection is that AD comes back for potentially Friday night's game against the Pelicans. And I know he wants to play, sat out so much, and every Laker fan is willing to talk themselves into, so long as we have those two, we can win any series. And my counter to that would be, do you really want to rush Anthony Davis back for a playoff push when your team is so decidedly overmatched? We have an entire season sample size, and we can tell you certain things for a fact. Your team is not good on defense, cannot shoot from 3, which means the spacing isn't good. And if LeBron can't put up 50 points, you have no real shot of winning since the All-Star break. Now, they've won without him having to do that, but it has been a fairly Herculean effort. And that's another one I'm struggling with on All-NBA for next week. So I've already started thinking about it. Just where does he end up getting placed? And you look at the stats, you look at everything that he's asked to do, and he does it. At his age, it's wildly impressive. And then on the flip side, I look at it going, well, yeah, but you put yourself in this situation. So I'm rewarding the Herculean effort, even though this is a problem that you created for yourself. And is that right to ding someone? But anyway, back to the Lakers. Given Anthony Davis's injury history, I mean, the guy just gets hurt so easily. And some of it is, basically human body really isn't designed to be that big and take this much of a punishment. But it's like some individuals are just prone to getting injured, and he is one of those guys where, dear God, it looks like he has 2 season-ending injuries every game where he crumples to the ground. They're always, not always, but by and large, it's usually just him falling to the ground. Sometimes it's to protect himself from getting injured, and other times I think it's foul baiting. Um, but I just don't know if it's worth it to me. If you're really intending on making this guy the cornerstone of the franchise for the foreseeable future, is it wise to send him out there with a team that is undermanned and you're going to be asking him to play heavy minutes and couple that with this, I think arguably could be the worst season he's ever had as far as shooting. I mean, he's historically bad from a couple areas on the floor, and I would just be tentative to roll him out there. I know LeBron doesn't want to sit because he's chasing Kareem, um, but you almost want to talk to him, pull him aside, and be like, "Look, you need to save some miles on your body. We're not going to win a championship this year. Why don't you take the extra little bit of rest that you're going to get right now and come back in and we can retool and reassess for next season?" So I think the addition of those 2 players, I'm just not buying it. Especially if, like, what are you talking yourselves into? That you're going to win a best of 7? Not when you got to play Phoenix or Memphis. Now, if they manage to not end up in the situation they're in and they could take on like the Jazz who are floundering, yeah, I believe they could actually beat the Jazz in a best of 7 if they had AD and LeBron. I think that's entirely possible. But that's not where it's going to land. And they can't even get into the 7-8, so they need to win. If they manage to climb back into the 9-10 range, they got to win 2 straight games just for a rematch of last year's first round. And now you're going in with a team that isn't as good. And Anthony Davis, was quoted as saying as like 2 weeks ago that had he not gone down hurt, they would have beat Phoenix, and Phoenix knows it. Like, at this point, be careful what you wish for, because you could end up taking it on Phoenix in that first round, and they're more than happy to make you eat those words. I mean, they're going to be taking it to you, a la, it's kind of like Memphis and Iguodala, as much as anytime they see, him, they, at least initially, they wanted to take it to him. How dare you give up on this team? We have something here, before the rest of the league took notice. Um, but anyway, we'll move on to some other injuries. So another team that is playing really hot are the Dallas Mavericks, but Tim Hardaway Jr. looks like he's done for the season. And Jason Kidd is on record as saying it's unlikely he comes back for the playoffs. Trey Burke is out, and they just signed Brandon Knight. But Brandon Knight hasn't played in the league for 2 seasons. So there's no way he's a stopgap measure of any real effectiveness if he couldn't get a run on any team for the past 2 years. Play some sort of, minutes in the upcoming end of regular into the playoffs. I think that's a fool's errand to ask anything of him other than, hey man, can you just sub in and play 5-6 minutes so we can get a little bit of rest and spread it around? But without Tim Hardaway Jr., at least they have Dinwiddie now, So they've got another shooter out there, and he's proven he can take the big shot and make it. And looks like Luka already trusts him. So that's a big positive. But if you had Hardaway out there, that's even more shooters, and especially for a heliocentric player like Luka, to have guys that can catch and shoot increases their value around Luka. Because he's going to dribble a ball for 16 to 18 seconds on some possessions. It's not the most efficient, but it is some of the most effective. But they're not the only teams, or team rather, dealing with injuries. Denver, it's been rumored back and forth. MPJ, Jamal Murray coming back. And for this show, went to try and figure out if there's been any change in that whatsoever. And it looks like, MPJ's back is still giving him problems, and Murray is not coming back this year. Every quote that I could find from, inside sources, from coaches, from anonymous this, that, and the other, he's not ready. He's not near enough. And what every Nugget fan was holding out hope for doesn't look like it's going to come to fruition. So now it becomes, what can Jokic do? Because, dear God, we need him to do everything. And the simple fact that they are still hovering above the play-in game is pretty impressive. I mean, they got a 2-game lead right now on Minnesota. And I think on some level, Jokic's MVP case relies on staying in that top 6. If they drop out of that top 6, Jokic loses the MVP. And I don't know if that's motivation for him. And I'm not saying he's a guaranteed winner. Obviously, I don't know, and I don't have a vote. But I think narratives dictate a lot of how people view the MVP ballot. And if you're so good, why is your team in the play-in game? Shouldn't you be, good enough to elevate whoever? And I think that's true at 45 and 31 where they currently sit. But whether or not that's enough to extend the discussion to, is he the MVP? I don't know. We'll find out. We get a couple weeks. And then, I don't know. Does anybody know? Let me know in the chat. Are they still doing the stupid award show where they don't officially announce the actual MVP, even though we all know it, but the award show that no one watches? I've never watched a single second of it. I could really give two shits. I wish they would just give it out. I realize they don't want to do what's happened in the past, like when Dirk got his MVP, but they got drummed out in the first round, so he had to accept it, even though they weren't in it anymore. So they don't want that to transpire. But this end of season awards thing at the show is so stupid. It doesn't generate any more discussion for the league in and of itself, but neither here nor there. All right, so they're the Nuggets. The Warriors are another team with weird injury questions leading into these playoffs. Steph is still sitting out. That was always the case, and he should be reevaluated in the next handful of days, like 3-4 days is roughly the timeline they initially set out of. We'll reevaluate in 10 to 14 days, and 14 days would be, like Saturday or Sunday, which they need him back. If you go look at the numbers with him, it's the same story, just like his on-off numbers. When he's out there, they're a completely different team. And when he's not playing with the team, they're terrible. And some nights they're the worst team in basketball by the numbers. So Steph, and he's got a history, but it's been a long time of his ankle injuries. So hopefully this didn't re-aggravate an injury from old, and now he's hobbled for the playoffs, and it's just simply an ankle sprain, and his body needs time to rest and recuperate. Clay has been amping his minutes up. he's played. He's gotten a little bit of rest in there as well. They've given him rest days, especially after a string of games where he's playing 35 to 38 minutes. I think he's got like 1 or 2 games since he came back where he played 40. So the concern there of how long will it take him to get back into game shape, I think that's subsided. But the bigger question is, how is Draymond's back? Where is that? He just took a rest day. He's only been reactivated for, I think it's 8 games, and he's had 2 games in that 8 where he's had to rest. That's not a good sign. So in order for the Warriors to make any kind of real noise in the playoffs, they got to have Curry and they got to have Draymond healthy. Both those guys. If one of the two of them is out, I can see a world in which they get drummed out in the first round. It totally can happen because Draymond gives them, basically, he's their point guard on offense and he's their floor general on defense. And without Curry's gravity on offense, it doesn't free up the shooters around. So to not have both pieces really destroys the identity of the offense and the players, the pieces as they're orchestrated around these guys. Now, of the two, losing Draymond is the one where they could still have some form of success. If they lose Curry, it's suddenly going to be Jordan Poole and Clay and Wiggins. We need you to step up. And I have no faith that Wiggins can do that. Clay, if this was another year, I'd have zero problem with that discussion. And Jordan Poole has shown that he's got the cojones to do it, but it's different. Steph's a different beast. Let's see who else we got. Phoenix, Cam Johnson, and JaVale are both listed as out as of right now. I think long term they should be all right. Cam is the one that I'm most worried about. They need his offensive punch. JaVale is fantastic, and he also gives Ayton rest, and this isn't Kaminsky minutes or Dario Saric or something where now you're going to a small ball lineup. You can still maintain a lot of your identity with JaVale out there, and JaVale actually plays very intelligently. His progression over the years is pretty incredible. I thought he was going to be out of the league after 5, maybe 6 years, just because he make so many boneheaded plays that it had to drive his coaches up a wall early on. And, to see him morph into a solid player on a championship team and somebody that now championship teams go out and try and acquire in free agency because they know he's going to give you stout minutes. This is good for JaVale. Seems like a nice enough guy. But Cam Johnson, they will definitely need in the playoffs. And everything I've seen is he should be fine come playoff time. And then lastly, my Bulls, Lonzo's no closer to coming back. We need him for the help for our defensive identity. I don't know that if we can make it out of the first round, I'll be happy. That's where I stand with the Bulls. I think we're trying to reintegrate basically 3 guys this late in the season and try and reforge the identity of the team. Maybe we look towards next year and set our expectations there after a full season of everybody together. Although it sucks if that's the case because DeMar is having an historically great season by his career standards, and injuries derailing the team between Pat Williams going out early, then Caruso and Lonzo. Caruso's back. Pat Williams is back-ish. But Lonzo not being out there, our defense took a tremendous hit when both Caruso and Lonzo went down. And then next year, looking at it, you're like, yeah, we get all 3 of those guys back. Suddenly we can score and defend with damn near anybody. But that's where it stands now. There's a lot of injuries and stuff up in the air. And some of it is end of the season. you acquire stuff and you got to get a little bit of rest, and others are big fat question marks. What are teams going to do? And how are they going to adjust to the changing landscape of what their expectations were, what they anticipated the squad looking like at this point, and the reality of the situation? It seriously, we are so close to the playoffs. I can't wait. I can't wait. Um, you know, my wife is lamenting it, knowing that I'm going to be watching basketball every night for the next couple months. But hey, what are you going to do? It's once a year. It's once a year for a long time, but it's once a year. I don't, I try and limit how much I'm watching at other times, just so that I can full bore. I think, last year I missed one game and I watched every other playoff game. Now, sometimes it's on my phone, like while I'm doing something else, but I am doing my damnedest to watch every single game, and I can't wait. All right, let's get over into the chat, see what you guys are saying, and then we're going to close up shop on today's show. It's a quick one, and I apologize for that, but next week's is probably going to be a long one, and then we got playoffs galore, which means longer shows more than likely. But anyway, Jeremy Bauer saying hello to everybody in the chat. How are you, sir? So Yuri McGarley says the Spurs are torn between tanking for a lottery and keeping the Lakers out of the play-in game. The struggle is real. As someone pointed out on Twitter, for Pop, what if this is his final moment, his one shining moment from this season is to keep the Lakers out of the playoffs? I think in some circles in NBA fandom, he would be even more beloved if that were the case. I like it for the drama because now it creates other speculation and discussion as to what comes next. But yeah, the Spurs are keeping it interesting. I mean, so long as Pop is there coaching, tanking is never going to happen. But that team is, undermanned and not of the same caliber as others in the West, which is obvious. So that's why their record reflects them being sub 5. But tanking, I never bought into. Jeremy Bauer says, I'm worried about the Cavs because the Knicks and Hawks were young teams and had a great season. And look at them now. So I hope it's a different scenario. I kind of believe it is because the Cavs proved it all year. When you watched them, it was legitimate. Like with the Knicks last year, it was like, yeah, but they're getting lucky in these, facets of the game where the ball is bouncing their way. And I don't know if that maintains long term. Now, I'll agree with you on the Hawks. I thought the Hawks were going to be, I want to say I originally projected them to be like third in the East, basically the Memphis of the East. A young team, hungry, wanting to prove last year wasn't a fluke. And because they've got young legs, they can just run you out of the court. Whereas I think the difference is with the Cavs, they play so well on both sides of the ball, whereas the Hawks were never good on defense, and especially their best player in Trae Young, another one that I'm going to struggle with on All NBA. Phenomenal offensive player, abysmal on defense. But when I watch the Cavs, I'm like, man, they're a force to be reckoned with on both ends of the court. And defense is about hustle, and those guys are already hustling. So offense, plus given their size and the fact that they're going to roll out if they bring back this squad, and looks like I don't see why they wouldn't. It can be just get it to one of our 3 7-footers that are out there at any point, and it's like, good luck trying to find matchups to where this is advantageous for you on defense, opposing team. So I believe the Cavs, they've got a damn good shot of being in this mix all over again. And it just seemed like the growth was from the team as opposed to specific individual players, even though certain players like Darius Garland and Jared Allen and Evan Mobley and whatnot, well, Mobley can't really put in this, but grew this year. It always seemed like it was more of a team. Let's get the team going. We're cheering for each other. Guy goes down, it's next man up to see that it was a matter of depth and not just top end talent. Although you could say that to some degree about the Hawks as well. The Knicks I never bought into. So them losing, in the playoffs last year, I was not surprised by. Just because of Julius Randle's game is limited, and now you're asking a lot of a bunch of guys that I'm not entirely sure I trust at all. All right, moving on. So Chris Miner says, Drew, as a Spurs fan, you are so right. Daniel Savoy says, hello. I hate seeing LeBron like this, but he's got nobody to blame but himself. I agree, Mr. Savoy. I agree. So Yuri comes back with he would love to have seen a Mavs versus Clippers episode 3, Revenge of the Mavs. I mean, yeah, but now the Mavs have gotten themselves out of that situation. So the Clippers would need to make it further if they're going to take on the Mavs. So yeah, unfortunately that one, for a while though, it did look like that was a potential reality that could end up taking place. But as of right now, yes, I don't see it happening. And thankfully we don't have to watch Morris cheap shot Luka's ankles again. So Yuri McGarley says, I have no idea why some people were so high on the Lakers at the start when they signed all those vets. They were basically the old star team, the Lakers spendables. Well, I think it was because you didn't know if Phoenix was for real. Golden State had so many different questions. So you're looking at the West going, well, the Clippers are not going to be at full health this year. This could be the Lakers. Like if everybody's healthy in a best of 7, you'd still have LeBron, AD, and Westbrook. And then Westbrook ends up having the worst season of his career in the discussion for the worst season of his career. AD has missed a huge chunk of the season, and LeBron has missed I think he's played 55 games as of right now, 54 games, something along those lines. So he's missed a chunk, like 16, 17 games, which is abnormal for LeBron. But I agree. I didn't like any of it. If they were going to make a trade, I still like the Buddy Hield for Kuzma and Montrezl Harrell, and you still maintain KCP, plus you get the extra shooting of Buddy Hield, and you're not saddled with Westbrook's enormous contract, and it gives you more flexibility. Plus, you don't reduce your depth all that much. And then there's the question of Talen Horton-Tucker and Alex Caruso and why they didn't initially give Horton-Tucker a longer contract, because this year he'd be under, instead of paying him $9.5 million, had they signed him to, if they would liked him so much, they could have signed him to, I think it was a 4-year rookie deal, because he's a second rounder. He'd be making about $1.8 million this year as opposed to 9.5. So then that would have freed up the extra cap space to more than likely keep Caruso and then have this discussion about Horton-Tucker next year. And then on top of that, he's got a player option for the 23-4 season. So it reduces his trade value next year's trade deadline. So not only could you have extended or signed him initially for an extra year and it's only going to cost you 1.8, then you gave him a contract that is advantageous to him and not you. So if nobody was going to bite on last year's trade deadline and then this year's, sure as shit, no one is going to bite on him next year unless they have assurances that he's going to resign. And who wants to trade for Talen Horton-Tucker with it being contingent on, are you willing to sign here? They've made befuddling move after befuddling move. And that's one of many questions in Lakerdom. So Sabo says, well, talking about Jamal Murray being out for a while. Yeah. Heroes in a half court says, my Spurs walking the Lakers down like Steve Rogers on your left. Uh, I mean, it was so long as trajectories stayed where they were, it was just a matter of time. And on some level, it's been impressive how bad the Lakers have consistently played. You know, they have enough talent to be 500, a 500 team, and yet they are wildly under that. Um, yeah, I hope we don't have the Lakers in the playoffs because I don't want to have to hear nonstop. Oh, could the Lakers win this round? Can they take this team? Let's look at the matchups and be like, you're delusional. Delusional. I realize that you need to fill hours on television, but that is utter nonsense. Have you watched this team? Who can they hang with? Oh, well, we get a healthy LeBron and AD out there and be like, okay, and who? Um, anyway, uh, the Whackness 95 says, what is your most anticipated or dreaded first round matchup from an entertainment perspective? Why? I mean, I keep looking at it as it changes and be like, oh, what about this one? Oh, what about that? I kind of like that. Um, but things are in such flux. It keeps changing that you're looking at like a Golden State and Denver in the first round. That would be a tremendous amount of fun. But right now, Golden State has a 1-game lead, so that could be Mavs and Nuggets. I still find that interesting because both teams kind of run into the same problem of what are you going to do about Jokic? And then on the flip side, Denver, what are you going to do about these perimeter guards that you don't really have an answer for, that you can't match shot for shot? So it'd be a high scoring affair. Um, yeah, the 1 and 2 seeds. I mean, I'm excited to see Memphis play anybody in the opening round. If it ends up being Minnesota, Minnesota's been a team in waiting. Can they ever get their shit together? Finally do. And now they have to go up against the Young Bucks, who just have depth that damn near every team would be envious of. I think as it stands right now, Phoenix might be the only team that isn't envious of Memphis's depth because they've got dudes for days. As evidenced by Ja goes down, they don't miss a beat. Ja and Triple J are out, they still win. You get Desmond Bain to step up. Dylan Brooks comes back, although I'm not the biggest Dylan Brooks fan. I think he's a little too overconfident, in my opinion, especially when he's out there with. And a lot of that is, I think, coming from last season, too. But I'm a big Desmond Bain fan. I think the East has more interesting matchups because there's so many teams that are just bunched together and very close. That as it stands right now, the Boston Toronto series, it's going to be excellent, man. Toronto is a no bullshit team, and they're going to be tough. I wouldn't want to play them if I were a top seed team in the East. But even still, if Brooklyn wins, they're playing the Bucks. That's the best opening round matchup. A rematch of last year's playoffs. If Durant's toe isn't over the line and that's a 3 instead of a 2, and they win that, do the Nets win a championship last year? Great question. I don't know. I don't think so because I don't think they have the depth to match up with Phoenix. But you never know. But that opening round, and but at the same time, Milwaukee could jump up to the number 1 seed. They're only a half game back. And then you have Heat versus Nets. Well, that's interesting. I mean, the only thing right now that Brooklyn doesn't want is Toronto to drop back down to 7 because Toronto is the only place that Kyrie can't play as of now. So long as they don't have to play Toronto in the playoffs, they're happy, is my guess. I don't think they really give a shit, but you want to have the availability for full team. But yeah, if you got Bucks Nets, I think that is can't miss television for me, and I'm watching every second of that. You also have two generational talents meeting up again in the playoffs. And is this going to be a yearly tradition that we're just starting? Potentially. Can't wait if it is. I like both of those guys a lot. I enjoy watching them play. Plus, they, seem like they're good teammates, and the guys around them like to play with them. I think that would be my number one choice as of right now. Professor Rhino saying, have an awesome day. I appreciate that. Oh, Jake Cleveland just said, just saw Rick Fox and Oz. That was a surprise. Yeah. If you're that early into Oz, like it gets weird towards the end. I watched the whole run. But for a while there, man, it's a really excellent show. And then finally, we're going to close out with this. Diamond Rattler says Jokic is MVP. We'll see. I have my thoughts on MVP. I'm not sure how deep I'll go on my fake ballot next week. If it's just top three, or will I do like the official? I think they have to send in top five. And then all NBA. Mark Stein tweeted out, and I didn't know that this was the rule. You can vote on first team, Jokic and Embiid. You have to put one of them at the forward, but it's not an overall accumulation of votes that gets you a spot on the first team. By that, I mean, if they split the vote and each gets, let's say there's 100 votes and each gets 50 center votes and 50 forward votes, or for the sake of argument, let's say one of them gets 51 votes and the other gets 49. But then the inverse is one gets 51 forward votes and the other gets 49. If any other forwards accrue more than 51 votes, then that individual is then bumped to the second team of Jokic and Embiid. So, yeah, you can get both of them on there, but you'd have to, league-wide, all sports reporters would have to agree which guy you're voting at forward. Otherwise, you're relegating to the second team. And then I think you have to answer that question by saying, well, who are you voting for MVP? I wish the NBA would just change it to vote the 15 best players, rank them in 3 tiers. Here's my tier 1. If it's all centers, it's all centers. Those were the 5 best guys that year. Here's the second 5 best guys. And here's the third best. And those are my 3 teams. And we don't need to orchestrate an actual quote unquote team, because who gives a shit? And it's not like any of these hypotheticals. It's not like first team needs to play second team to determine that they are first team. And B, it's a lot of positionless, as evidenced by certain guys qualified at 2 spots. It's like, well, if they qualify 2 spots, like that actually hurts them, as opposed to pigeonholing them into one specific category. Somebody like LeBron, I'm sure is going to qualify at guard and forward. But that could end up screwing him, as opposed to if you just said he's a forward or he's a guard. So why not just make it positionless and just be like, give me your top 15 guys, 1 through 15, done. We don't have to do this, overall weighted, and how many forward votes did you get versus how many guard or center votes, or I don't know. I think it's ridiculous. So that's the other thing I'm debating. Am I going to stick to the rules of theirs, even though I don't have to, or I'm just going to say, here are the top 5 players in the league this year. Here's the next 5 players. And here's the bottom, the next 5 players. There's your top 15. I'd be more apt to do that. Although Wackness says all NBA placement only really matters for player bonuses. Well, getting the all NBA play, getting that does. It has a bump up in your contract. It's also for your legacy, what you'll be, remembered for. But that's it. All right. So look forward to the award show for the end of the season next week. And then trying to figure out what I'll be able to do for the playoffs if I'm going to try and do 2 shows a week. My schedule is pretty hectic right now. That's what sucks. because fitting in all these games last year was easier. This year's going to be tougher. I'm going to do it though, guys. I'm going to figure out a way to do it. But anyway, that's it for me this week. You can follow me at Matt Knost. If you're watching this, or if you're not watching this, rather, I do it live every Wednesday at noon over at youtube.com/dropping dimes. To everybody that joined me in the chat, once again, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much. I can't wait. Please bring your All-NBA and MVP, Rookie of the Year, and Coach of the Year choices next week. I want to see them. So have them preloaded. So you just put them in there and I can scroll through and be like, oh, Daniel Savoy has this. Heroes in a Half Court has that. The Wackness 95, Professor Rhino, Jake Cleveland, Diamond Rattler, Uri McGarley, Chris Miner, Jeremy Bowers. I want to see it. If you don't have it, that's fine. But if you've got ideas, this is a populist show. I'm just a dude that watches a lot of NBA. My vote means nothing. It means as much as yours, so we might as well see what everybody's vote is. And all right, that's it. You can follow me at Matt Knost. I'll see you guys next week with another edition at noon. And stay safe out there. Adios.